Commander Vethal had conducted 47 interdictions in his career. He had stopped hegemony grain haulers running contraband through the Paulian corridor. He had boarded Tessari science vessels suspected of military research. He had once seized an entire Drecathi colonial transport and remanded its 400 passengers to Karate processing without incident, without negotiation, and without a single moment of hesitation. 47 interdictions. Not one of them had made him feel the way he felt now, standing at his sensor station aboard the Absolute Sovereignty, watching a single human cargo freighter drift through the outer edge of claimed Sector 12. It wasn't doing anything threatening. That was the problem. The vessel had appeared on long-range sensors 40 minutes ago, transiting at low speed along the disputed boundary corridor, technically neutral space, technically unclaimed, technically not worth the fuel to patrol. The Karate Dominion had posted a formal navigation restriction through the region 8 months ago following the cessation of hostilities with the Human Compact. The restriction was clear. All non-Karate vessels required prior authorization for transit. The humans had filed no authorization. Standard interdiction procedure. Vethal had brought the Absolute Sovereignty across the boundary at combat speed, calculated to arrive within hailing distance with enough visible mass to discourage any attempt at flight. The human ship's registry returned a designation, UES Perennial. Registered class, bulk cargo freighter. Hull age, 31 years. Last documented port of call, Compact Logistics Station 7, Endra System, 14 months ago. Declared cargo, agricultural fabrication components bound for the Compact's outer settlements. Nothing remarkable. Nothing alarming. Old ship. Civilian registry. Light mass. Probably a skeleton crew. Probably a cargo hauler captain who hadn't checked the updated navigation restrictions and was about to have a very expensive conversation with a Karate border commander. Vethal had opened the channel at standard hailing frequency and delivered the interdiction notice by the book. Then he had waited for the response that always came, the rush of words, the explanations, the fear, the offers, the bargaining that every civilian crew performed when a Karate heavy cruiser dropped out of transit beside them. He had waited 30 seconds. Then 40. Then a full minute and a half. When the response came, it was a single voice. Female. Tired. The way a person sounded when they had been awake for too long and had decided some time ago to stop pretending otherwise. Sovereignty. We read you. Go ahead. Not, we apologize for the unauthorized transit. Not, please, we didn't know. Not the flood of terrified cooperation that Vethal's experience told him was the only rational response to an armed Karate cruiser at close range. Just, go ahead. As though he had called to ask about the weather. Vethal had exchanged a look with his tactical officer, Rithon, who had been with him for 9 years and understood his silences. Rithon had no response to offer. He simply turned back to his instruments. Vethal proceeded with standard protocol. He stated the nature of the violation. He requested identification of the commanding officer and crew manifest. He stated that a customs and compliance boarding would be conducted and that cooperation was expected and required under Dominion transit law. The voice came back the same way it had come the first time. Understood. Captain Alara Mize. Compact Registry, Civilian Classification. We'll have the manifest ready when your team boards. Send your dock request to our secondary airlock, primary is occupied. Vethal processed that for a moment. Primary airlock is occupied. Not broken. Not under repair. Occupied. He noted it. He filed it in the place where commanders file details that don't yet mean anything but feel like they might. Then he ordered a boarding team of 8 assembled and cleared the secondary airlock for approach. The first thing the boarding team reported was the smell. Not a mechanical smell. Not recycled air and metal. Something older. Something that reminded VethAL, when the team lead relayed the detail over the open channel, of the maintenance level of a ship that had been running without full atmosphere cycling for a long time. The kind of smell that accumulated in vessels that spent years away from proper servicing. The perennial was 31 years old. That wasn't unusual. But something about the way the team lead described it made VethAL lean toward his sensor feed. The perennial's hull was 31 years old. The official mass register said it displaced 84,000 tons standard, a reasonable figure for a bulk freighter of its class. The sensor officer, a young karate named Seveth, had been running passive scans since they arrived within range. "Commander," Seveth said, and there was something careful in his voice. Something that was almost not concern but was close enough to concern that VethAL turned to look at him. "Actual mass displacement reads approximately 112,000 tons. VethAL said nothing for a moment. 112,000 tons. Not 84,000. A discrepancy of 28,000 tons that the perennials registry did not account for and that did not correspond to any cargo load the manifest could reasonably justify. "Sensor error?" VethAL asked. Seveth ran the reading twice more. "No, Commander. 28,000 tons of mass that wasn't supposed to be there. The boarding team was already inside. The cargo hold was full. This was not unusual. Cargo ships carried cargo." But the team lead's next transmission made VethAL stand up from his station and cross to the forward display. "Commander. The containers are uniform." In a bulk freighter, cargo was rarely uniform. It was assembled, packed, stacked according to origin and destination and load balance. Varied shapes. Varied markings. Varied materials. The randomness of commerce. The perennial's hold contained 340 identical containers, arranged in a grid pattern so precise that the team lead described it as more similar to military supply loading than anything he had seen on a civilian vessel. Each container was sealed. Each container bore no destination markings, no content labels, no shipping documentation beyond a single alphanumeric designation. Each container was heavy. Not heavy in a way that the manifest explained. The team lead stood in front of one container and ran his handheld scanner over the surface. Then he ran it again. Then he said, slowly, "Commander. These containers are not carrying fabrication components." VethAL kept his voice flat. "What are they carrying?" A pause. The boarding team lead was an experienced officer. 12 years in karate customs enforcement. He did not pause often, and when he did, it was because he was choosing his next words with care. "Metal. Shaped metal. High-density alloy. Modular configurations. Commander. I am looking at weapon system components. Individual pieces. Hundreds of individual pieces." VethAL felt something cold move through him that he did not acknowledge and did not show. "Open one container. We've attempted to open 3. They're sealed. Standard civilian security locks, but the mechanisms are unresponsive. Can you cut them?" Another pause. "Yes. But Commander, the containers are also reading a communication handshake. A passive network signal, running between all of them. They're talking to each other. Low bandwidth, constant. Like a status check." VethAL turned to Rithon. "Get me an active scan of the entire ship. I want to know what we're actually looking at." Rithon began his work. He was thorough and he was fast and he had been good at this for 9 years. He ran the scan 3 times, not because he doubted his instruments, but because the results he was getting demanded that he be certain. Then he brought them to VethAL and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to add. The perennial was not a cargo freighter carrying hidden weapons components. The perennial was a weapons platform. One that had been designed and built and disguised to look like a cargo freighter carrying nothing of military significance. Not one system. A distributed one, 340 individual components, each inert and incomplete on its own, each meaningless in isolation, but networked and cross-referenced in ways that VethAL's analysts would spend hours fully mapping. The ship's civilian hull contained integrated power routing that the original freighter class did not have. The ship's engines were not the engines on the manifest. The primary airlock, occupied, the captain had said, was occupied by a power coupling that connected the ship's reactor to something in the forward bay that Reth scans read as an emitter assembly too large to have been installed after launch. The Perennial had been built like this. Not retrofitted. Not smuggled. Built, slowly, deliberately, over years, to look like nothing while being something else entirely. VethAL stood at his display for a long time. Then he opened the channel to the Perennial's bridge. Captain Alara Mize sounded the same as she had the first time. Tired. Not afraid. Not defiant. Not posturing. Simply the voice of someone who had been awake a long time and had run out of patience for pretending that things were different than they were. Captain, VethAL said. Explain what I'm looking at. What you're looking at is a cargo freighter, Commander. My scans say otherwise. Your scans are accurate, she said. It's both. He let that sit in the air for a moment. You are carrying a distributed weapons system aboard a civilian-registered vessel in violation of 12 separate Karate Compact treaty frameworks and the Navigation Compact's own arms transit accords. Yes, she said. You don't deny it. No. You understand what this means for you and your crew. There was a pause then. Not the pause of someone frightened, but the pause of someone considering whether the next thing they were going to say needed any particular preamble or whether they could simply say it directly. She chose directly. Commander. Before you make your next decision, I want you to check something for me. Take your sensor array and run a mass displacement sweep of everything within 400,000 kilometers. Not just ships. Everything. Debris. Rocks. Relay stations. Derelicts. Everything. Why? VethAL asked, though he already felt, somewhere beneath his deliberate calm, that he was not going to like the answer. Because I think you've already noticed that our mass reading didn't match our manifest, she said. And I think you're about to notice that we're not the only thing out here that doesn't. Seveth ran the sweep. It took 90 seconds because VethAL asked him to be thorough. When it came back, the display in front of VethAL looked the same as it always did, the sensor-mapped rendering of the region around them, the scatter of debris and rock and dead infrastructure that accumulated in every transit corridor over decades of use. Relay buoys running on low-cycle maintenance power. A compact-era derelict that had been drifting in the region for 15 years, logged as non-hazardous and non-recoverable. 7 mid-sized asteroids are in the local gravity gradient. 3 dead satellites. Miscellaneous debris fields. Normal. Unremarkable. The landscape of neglected space. But over each object, Seveth had now placed a mass displacement figure. VethAL looked at them. He looked at them for a long time. The relay buoys read significantly over their design mass. The derelict registered 4 times its listed displacement. The asteroids, 7 mid-sized asteroids, each carried a secondary mass reading inside their outer layer, dense and geometric in a way that natural formations were not geometric. The dead satellites were not dead. Their power output was minimal, almost undetectable, but it was there, constant and cycling in a pattern that Seveth was now flagging in small, careful text at the bottom of the display. Network handshake detected. Signal consistent with perennial container array. They were all talking to each other. The relay buoys and the derelict and the asteroids and the dead satellites and the containers aboard the perennial were all talking to each other in the same low-bandwidth constant signal, the same quiet status check that the boarding team had detected in the hold. Vethal counted the objects. 41 separate contacts. Each one was carrying mass it was not supposed to carry. Each one networked to the others. Each one, he understood this now, the way a person understood something they had been trying not to understand, each one carrying the same type of component system that the perennials hold contained. Not complete systems. Distributed pieces. Individual modules that meant nothing alone and meant everything together. The boarding team was still aboard the perennial. Vethal did not move for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, to Rethon. How long would it take those objects to activate and configure? Rethon understood the question. He looked at the display. He ran the numbers. Based on current network traffic, Rethon said, they've already been configuring for the last 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Since the boarding team boarded. Since the secondary airlock opened and karate boots touched the perennial's deck. The boarding triggered it, Vethal said. Yes, Commander. He stood there with that knowledge and did not let it show on his face, because his crew was watching him and because showing what he felt would not change anything. Then he opened the channel to Captain Mize again. How long has this been here? He asked. She didn't ask what he meant by this. She already knew what he'd found. The oldest placement in this sector is 4 years and 3 months, she said. The most recent is 7 weeks. 4 years. While the Karate Dominion was negotiating transit rights and posting navigation restrictions and conducting interdiction operations in a region they believed they controlled, humans had been placing things in the silence around them. Slowly. Quietly. One object at a time, spread across months, unregistered, unlogged, each piece meaningless on its own. How many sectors? Vethal asked. There was a pause. That's not information I'm authorized to share, she said. He understood what that meant. Not none. Not just this one. Something larger than he wanted to calculate at this particular moment. The perennial, he said. What does it do? In a network sense? It's a command relay. Primary and secondary targeting coordination, distributed power synchronization, and fire sequencing. Without the perennial or something like it, the network is passive. Waiting. With it, the network becomes something else. A weapon, he said. A very old weapon, she said. By the time your government posted the navigation restriction, the network in this sector was already 60% complete. Vethal considered that. The navigation restriction had been filed 8 months ago. The network had been 60% complete at that point. Humans had already been building it when the Karate posted the legal documentation that was supposed to keep humans out of this space. They hadn't been building it in response to the restriction. They had been building it before the restriction was filed. Before. Which meant they had expected the restriction. Or something like it. Or the situation that produced it. They had looked at the shape of events some number of years ago and decided, here. Here is where we should be ready. Why did you let yourself be stopped? Vethal asked. It was the question he'd been building toward without knowing it. The perennial had been transiting a disputed corridor, slowly, without authorization. In a ship that could not run from a Karate cruiser. Making no attempt to avoid detection. Waiting to be found. Captain Mize let a moment pass before she answered. Because the network reaches operational readiness through one of 2 triggers, she said. An external activation code from Compact Command, or a confirmed boarding action. Vethal felt the cold thing move through him again. You wanted to be boarded. I wanted the network to have a reason to finish waking up, she said. And I needed a Karate commander close enough to see it happen. Why? The channel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was the same, tired, measured, without drama. But something in it had shifted. Something that was not quite sadness and not quite weight but was somewhere between the two. "Because we've done this before," she said. "Not here. Not this sector. But something like this, in another place, a long time before you and I were having this conversation. We built a network. We waited. No one came to look at it. No one saw it. And then we had to use it." Bethel said nothing. "We would rather someone see it," she said. "That's the point of the perennial. That's always been the point. We would rather a karate commander be standing exactly where you're standing, looking at exactly what you're looking at, and understand exactly what it means, and go home and explain it to whoever needs to understand it. We would rather that than the alternative. The alternative being that you use it." "Yes. You're telling me this is a deterrent." "I'm telling you that 4 years ago, the people who placed the first component in this sector did it because they hoped it would never need to do anything but exist," she said. "I'm telling you that the activation my boarding triggered is reversible. A stand-down code is ready to transmit the moment your team is clear of my ship and your vessel is at minimum 600 kilometers distance. And if I don't leave? Then in approximately 4 minutes, 41 separate objects in this sector will have finished their configuration cycle, and a compact rapid response force will receive an automated distress beacon from this location, and you will be in the center of a fully operational distributed fire network with no line of retreat that isn't already covered." Bethel turned to Rethon. Rethon had already done the math. He looked at his commander and did not need to say anything. Bethel called the boarding team back. He did it calmly. He stated it as a precautionary withdrawal pending confirmation of additional scans, which was not the truth but was the kind of statement that gave his team a reason for the order that didn't require them to process anything larger than the moment they were in. They returned to the absolute sovereignty in 7 minutes. Bethel brought his ship to 800 kilometers distance, not 6, because he was not a man who operated at minimums when he had the choice of margins. Then he sat in his command chair and looked at his display, at the 41 objects in the sector that were now reading at full power, gentle, contained, not weapons hot but ready, like hands resting near instruments rather than on them, and he thought about 4 years of slow, quiet placement. He thought about the relay buoys and the asteroids and the dead satellites that had been sitting in this space while karate patrol routes ran nearby, while karate diplomats filed paperwork, while karate commanders like him assumed they understood what the border looked like. He thought about how many sectors. He thought about the answer that hadn't been given and what it implied. He opened the channel one final time. "Captain Mize. Commander. I am withdrawing to karate space. I will be filing a detailed report." "I know," she said. "This conversation will have consequences." "Yes," she said. "That's why we had it." He started to close the channel. Then something stopped him, something that was not protocol and was not procedure but was simply the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind since the moment she had said go ahead in that tired, unhurried voice. "How long have you been on that ship?" he asked. A pause. 14 months, she said. 14 months, 11 days. 14 months. Alone in that old hull, drifting through the corridor, waiting for a karate cruiser to arrive. Eating recycled food. Breathing cycled air. Maintaining the network. Waiting to be found by someone worth finding. "Your government sent you to sit out here for over a year," he said. "Alone." "I volunteered," she said. Bethel had nothing to say to that. He was a commander who had stood in difficult places, who had made hard choices, who understood sacrifice in the abstract and in the specific. But the idea of 14 months in a cold freighter waiting for the right enemy to arrive, because the alternative was a war that no one on either side had thought far enough ahead to prevent. He closed the channel. He gave the order to withdraw. The absolute sovereignty cleared the sector boundary 40 minutes later. In his log, Commander Vethal filed the encounter under standard interdiction documentation. He recorded the vessel's registration, the nature of the transit violation, the boarding action and its termination, and the discovery of a prepositioned distributed military network of significant scale and sophistication. He noted the activation event. He noted the stand-down. He noted the network's current status, passive. Waiting. Present. He did not file a recommendation for military action. He did not file a recommendation for diplomatic protest. He filed one recommendation, and it was short, and it was addressed to the High Command of the Karate Dominion, and it said: before any further action is taken regarding human transit rights in contested sectors, Command is advised to conduct a comprehensive mass displacement survey of all objects, natural and artificial, in all sectors currently designated as Dominion-controlled or Dominion-disputed territory. I believe the results will be instructive. He submitted the report. Then he leaned back in his chair and looked at the stars through the forward viewport, and thought about the 41 objects sitting quietly in Sector 12, and thought about all the other sectors, and thought about the humans who had looked at a border dispute some number of years ago and begun, slowly and without announcement, to prepare for the possibility that no one would listen. Not as a threat. Not as aggression. As patience. As the understanding that if you build something quiet enough and wait long enough and make sure the right person sees it at the right moment, you might never have to use it. He thought about Captain Alara Mize in her old ship, 14 months and 11 days, breathing recycled air, waiting to be found. He thought about what kind of people produced that kind of waiting. He had spent his career believing that humanity was a secondary power. Younger, smaller, less patient, less certain than the Karate Dominion. He had believed this because the evidence around him had always supported it. He understood now that the evidence around him had been arranged. The absolute sovereignty accelerated toward home. Behind them, in the silence of Sector 12, 41 objects remained. Patient. Present. Still networked to each other in their quiet constant signal, checking status, confirming readiness, doing nothing at all. Waiting for the next question.